Welcome to Unregistered Live, the official live stream of Unregistered Academy, the fastest growing movement and school on the internet. If you would like to take a look at the course I will be discussing tonight, which is upcoming in a few weeks, go to unregisteredacademy.com. The link is in the description. Click on it, peruse our courses. We have several coming up. We have more than 30 available in our streaming video library. I know that this course that I will be, This course I'll be discussing today or tonight is probably the most popular I have ever taught. I have taught it in the past on other platforms, and it is the course I am most asked about. It is on postmodernism, an introduction. So go take a look at that on our website, unregisteredacademy.com. The link is also right there on the screen, I believe. Upcoming in early April. So tonight, I'm going to give a brief, sort of a preview of that course, but also talk about a portion of it that is quite relevant today in American politics, which has to do with the trans movement, the so-called transgender movement, which we all know has pretty much dominated the headlines and the news and political discourse for, about 5 years now, and which has had even a significant effect on the recent election and on many other aspects of American lives. I think it's affected all of us, even if we've never seen a transgender person. I happen to live in a place, which is the San Francisco Bay Area, where there are more trans people per capita probably than anywhere else in the entire world. But I know some of us live in other places. But even those of you who do not live among trans people are affected by this because it's just dominated the airwaves, the internet, and much of our discussion about politics in America. So I want to say that, well, first, the reason I am doing this live stream, and one of the reasons I am offering this course on postmodernism, is that the most common claim made among critics of the transgender movement is that it stems from postmodernist philosophy or postmodernist thinking. And I am attempting here and in the course to disabuse people of that notion, which comes from people, and I will say this overwhelmingly, who have not read postmodernism. So let's talk about the transgender movement, and then we will look at the slice of the postmodernist movement and see how they actually contradict. The transgender movement tells us that certain people were born in the wrong body. Some people were born and assigned, this is the word they use, assigned a gender and a sex at birth. And trans people are those whose body does not conform with that assignment. We are told that their essential nature, their essential gender and sexual identity is simply different than the one they were assigned and different than the one society assigns to them. But overwhelmingly, in fact, I don't think I've seen an exception to this, among the trans movement, and when I say the trans movement, I mean the political movement self-identifying as the transgender liberation movement, which again, we have seen emerge in the last 5 years, maybe the last 10 years, but certainly the last 5 years. Overwhelmingly, members of that movement, and that's who I'm talking about tonight, have said that they were born a particular gender. They were born a woman, but they were told they were a man. They were born a man, but the doctor at birth wrote female. They feel like a man growing up into adulthood, but the whole world looks at them and says, no, you're a woman. They claim, and I know this is, everyone watching this has heard many, many, many trans people say this. They have always felt like they were trapped in the wrong body. Always. Here is the most famous example. Caitlyn Jenner, who more than anyone else about 10 years ago popularized the idea of transgenderism, and maybe more than anyone else gave birth to or gave rise to the transgender movement. Although I think Caitlyn has disavowed a lot of it. But nonetheless, her statements about who she is and who she has, and this is the important point, always been, laid the basis, I'm arguing, and I think this is almost self-evident, for what became the trans political movement of the 21st century. So here's her most famous, or one of her most famous statements about this, and I'm afraid I'm blocking this. Let me see. Oh boy. In a simple way, there was always this woman that lived inside of me. There was always this woman who lived inside of me, but I lived my life as Bruce. But she was always there. She was always present. I can't actually read this. I just finally got to the point in life where it's time to live as a woman, basically. But the first two sentences are the most important here. She always was a woman. The woman was always present inside of her, always, which, of course, suggests that since birth, she was a woman, but was assigned as a man. This is the definition of essentialism. She is claiming that her essence, her very being, has always belonged to or been a part of one particular established gender. It was just mistaken by society. Now, this, I will argue, is not just a direct contradiction with postmodernist thought, and I will say early feminist theory and early gender theory, the original gender theory. It is a repudiation of them. It is a repudiation of them. Simone de Beauvoir, one of the most famous feminists, arguably the first modern feminist philosopher, French philosopher who lived between 1908 and 1986, did much of her most important work in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. In many ways, was not identified or didn't identify as a postmodernist, but everyone includes her in the sort of pantheon of postmodernist thinkers, and her ideas, this is universally accepted among postmodernist thinkers, initiated the critique of gender, the analysis of gender that became central in postmodernist thinking. And here is what she had to say in 1975 during a television interview, which I think is one of the finest, clearest statements of not just gender theory, but also of postmodernist thinking that I've ever seen. So I want to show you that right now. And this will be just a part of the course on postmodernism at the Academy. So in 1975, she said this on television. One is not born a woman, one becomes one. One is not born a woman, one becomes one. I believe she has already contradicted Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner said, as you just saw, that she was born a woman. She was always a woman. That woman was always present. Simone de Beauvoir, who launched the movement that many people have stated or claimed is the reason for people like Caitlyn Jenner and the reason for the trans activists who have been running amok for the last 5 years or so, actually is directly, completely contradicting her. One is not born a woman, one becomes one. Being a woman is not a natural fact. It is the result of a certain history, meaning it's not biological, it is historical, it is not biological, it is social. It is not biological, it is cultural. What a woman is. Then she says, there is no biological or psychological destiny that defines a woman as such. She is the product of history, of civilization, which has resulted in her current status. And secondly, for each individual woman, of her personal story in particular, that of her childhood. This determines her as a woman, creates in her something which is not at all innate or an essence, something which has been called the eternal feminine or femininity. The more we study the psychology of children, the deeper we delve, the more evident it becomes that baby girls are manufactured to become women. Long before a child is conscious, the way it is breastfed or held or rocked, etc., inscribes, meaning is written into its body, what may later appear to be a destiny. Biological differences are part of it. She in no way denies the differences, the biological differences that we are all keenly aware of. Biological differences are part of it, but the emphasis placed on these differences, the importance they take on, come from the social context around them. Of course, it is important that it is women who get pregnant and have children and not men. That is a major difference. But it is not the basis for the difference in status or the exploitation and oppression which women are subjected to. It is a pretext around which the feminine condition is built, but it is not what determines this condition. The fact that women get pregnant and have children has been used specifically and explicitly for centuries and centuries to justify and explain why women, for instance, have been kept out of certain professions. Before the 1970s, before the feminist movement, it was many professions were barred to women. And that was precisely the reason offered, that because women bear children, they simply cannot work in places like factories and coal mines. They can't serve in the military. They can't serve in politics. They can't hold office. Because the biological fact that they bear children has, this was what was said, a social meaning, which is that they should bear children instead of non-child rearing activities. Women were denied the vote for precisely this reason as well. Women, because of their biological differences, should be kept in the home, doing domestic work, being the sovereign of the home. The woman's sphere was a common concept in early America and European history. The woman has dominion over the home, but she should not leave it, meaning she shouldn't act in a public way because her biology, her body, her womb, the fact that she bears children tells us that society should be ordered in a way, organized in such a way that she is kept at home raising the children. It's not illogical. But de Beauvoir, and I would say history since those times, has shown us that it's not so biologically determined that women should be in the home and could never operate in the public sphere in certain professions. Now, I'm sure some people watching this will have some negative reaction to the word oppression and words exploitation and oppression. And I'm sympathetic because, yes, as a historian, I can tell you, certainly in American history, I know this is true, that the vast majority of women, those people designated as women, have in our history, but I know this is true for other countries as well, not questioned what de Beauvoir calls their exploitation and oppression. These systems of exclusion and segregation have, for most women, been welcomed. Most women have not wanted to work in steel mills and coal mines or serve in the military. But of course, others have. But nonetheless, so I don't like to call it oppression or exploitation. That's not the point here. The point here is that they are assigned a different status based on their body parts. And their expectations are adjusted around their body parts, or have been historically. And so what this early intervention in gender theory, I believe, is showing us is a way to freedom. It says here that your biology is not your destiny. Your body parts and your chromosomes do not determine who you can be or should be. There is no social prescription written on your chromosomes. It does not say on the chromosomes one should be a president or one should be a housewife. We, as a society, as a civilization, have done that assigning. We have created social categories in which to put people who have particular chromosomes, particular body parts. Your body is not your destiny. It doesn't need to be, is really what de Beauvoir is saying. You can be a housewife. You can wear frilly dresses. You can like Sex in the City and romance novels if you were born a female, a woman, born a female. But you don't need to. You don't need to. You can escape your biology. You can escape, I should say, the social categories assigned to your biology. So I hope that's clear. I love this statement just for its clarity. Again, you don't have to like or agree with her claims about women having been exploited and oppressed, but I do think you can now see that this gender theory, this gender analysis, which is the origin of it, counters exactly what the trans movement has been saying. The trans movement of the last 5 to 10 years has been saying, we are born a particular gender, a particular sex, but you all get it wrong. De Beauvoir is saying, no, you're not born anything. You're not born anything socially significant. Yes, you might have a penis, you might have a womb, but that means nothing about what you can or should be socially in our society. It is, to me, a tremendous liberatory intervention. And this is why I have been an outright ally of this generation, the original generation of the gender theorists and the postmodernists. This is what they said. It was a movement for freedom, an intellectual movement for freedom that somewhere along the line, maybe in the 90s or 2000s, became almost inverted into an essentialist argument. And so any attempt to connect current transgender politics with postmodernism and gender theory and feminism is simply ignorant. And anyone who says that should take our course. And then, of course, Michel Foucault, who was operating at about the same time as de Beauvoir and who was keenly aware of de Beauvoir's book, he and the whole generation of philosophers who have been called postmodernists, in many cases called themselves postmodernists, they built upon early feminist gender theory, in large part launched by de Beauvoir. They are not the same things, postmodernism and gender theory, early gender theory and feminism, but they are absolutely, and this is an academic term, co-constitutive. They built each other. But this core claim or argument that de Beauvoir is making, Foucault and the postmodernists, but especially Foucault, developed into a larger critique of essentialist, deterministic claims that are made about all things, not just one's body, one's gender, one's identity, but claims about truth, about particular social groups, about reality, etc. So let's look at one of what I think is one of his most clearly articulated critiques of essentialist determinism. Criticism, when he says this, he means postmodernism. He means the postmodernist critique. Criticism is no longer going to be practiced in the search for formal structures with universal value, but rather as a historical investigation into the events that have led us to constitute ourselves and to recognize ourselves as subjects of what we are doing, thinking, and saying. Let's do that again. So we as postmodernists will no longer be looking for formal structures with universal value. In other words, the modernist approach to this is there are two genders across the world for all time. That's a universal, that's formal structures, universal value. Instead of that, he's saying, next clause in the sentence, rather as we will instead do a historical investigation into the events that have led us to constitute ourselves, to make ourselves into whatever it is we as a society believe that we are as individuals, and to recognize ourselves as subjects of what we are doing, thinking, and saying. We create ourselves, and society creates us too. It does not come from some absolute biological origin. Then he says, this criticism will not seek to identify the universal structures of all knowledge or of all possible moral action. That's something that the Bible does. That's something that Marxism does. These are universalizing grand narratives that claim universal truth. Are they not? They're not the only ones. There are multiple ideologies and worldviews out there that make cosmological claims about just about everything, including about who you are. He's saying here, postmodernists are not interested in that. We will not seek to identify the universal structures of all knowledge or of all possible moral action, of course, because morality comes straight from these epistemological claims. If it's the Bible, for example, there's obviously moral prescriptions that come from their explanation of how the world works. With Marxism, similarly, all sorts of moral prescriptions, commandments really, that come from their epistemological claims about how capitalism works, about how imperialism works, about how labor works. This critique, he says, will separate out from the contingency that has made us what we are. By that he means the historical, almost infinite number of decisions made every second of every day by people all over the earth as to who they are. And why is this contingent? Because we know, and I think even the most hardcore critics of gender theory acknowledge this, men in the United States in 2025 are defined very differently than men were in the United States in 1905. Men in the United States in 2025 are defined to this day very differently than men are defined in Thailand. And I think if you know anything about sort of gender configurations and categories globally and historically, you know they have changed almost constantly since the very ideas of men and women, or man and woman, were invented. Do we still think of men and women the same way that we thought of Adam and Eve 2,000 years ago? Is that still our template? No, clearly we've added all sorts of things, including scientific categories like XY and XX chromosomes. We've also discovered that many men and many women can have sexual desire for the same sex, which doesn't comport with our definitions of men and women. Pretty big exception to the rule. We will separate out from the contingency that has made us what we are the possibility of no longer being, this is a movement for freedom. We will separate out from the contingency that has made us what we are, meaning the history of the definition of our identity. I, Thad Russell, as a man, that definition, we will separate that out. The possibility of no longer being, doing, or thinking what we are, do, or think. Well, yes, I've been defined as a man since birth. Joe Rogan very famously tried to define me as a man at birth. But if I choose to cross my legs over my thigh, I can't show you here, and I live in Jamaica, I will get lynched for that, because that's not what a man does. That's not what a man does. If I choose to cry in public, which I've also famously done many times, that's also not what a man does. So I'm getting confused here. What if I like to cross my legs over my thigh? What if I like to cry in public? Am I no longer a man? So the definitions clearly are very complicated, contingent, ever-changing, and they vary across space and time. In France, definitions of men and women are very different than our definitions in America. Across history, it's obvious. Every society has defined and redefined man, woman, and other gender categories always. Next, last sentence here. It is not seeking to make possible a metaphysics that has finally become a science. Again, making it into a science is making claims about absolute truth, right? We're not doing that, but that's what the trans movement has done. They've tried to make it into a science, claiming that certain people were born in the wrong body, but have essentially always been of a particular gender. The most absolutist truth claim ever. This is a complete repudiation of postmodernism. He then says, it is seeking to give new impetus as far and wide as possible to the undefined work of freedom. So the intervention by the early second wave feminists like Simone de Beauvoir, the original postmodernists like Michel Foucault, was to say that the structures, the ideologies, the worldviews, the cultures, the norms that we're born into that structure our life before we're even conscious, right? I was stamped as a male before I even could speak or think or talk or anything. And not just stamped as that, but expected, right? Expected to think and behave in particular male ways. They're saying that's all actually historically contingent. It's all been socially constructed. And we know that because it's changed over time and over space in almost infinite ways. It's constantly changing. If a man likes to wear dresses and watch Sex and the City and speaks like a woman, is he no longer a man? Even though he has a penis and the appropriate chromosomes, etc. Or can we just say, let him be free? Now, here's the thing, and this is where I will end. the trans movement's, in many ways, puzzling embrace of a new essentialism, and this is where they, in a sense, are the same as MAGA Christian conservatives, right? They all agree that there's an essential gender for each of us. They just disagree about who belongs to which gender, but they all agree that at birth, we belong to a particular gender. So the transgender movement, ironically, is deeply reactionary, actually. And this is why the transgender movement has been pushing the idea of transgender children. Caitlyn Jenner said it, didn't she? I was always a woman. This woman was always present inside of me. That means when she was 1 year old, 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, she was trapped in the wrong body, and it would have been just for her to correct her body to make it conform to her actual, real, essential gender. And if you ask the parents of trans children, if you ask trans children themselves, and I've known many, but you've all seen this, they will say, my child was born in the wrong body. They are essentially of this other gender, and it must be corrected through whatever means necessary, right? It is an absolute repudiation, again, of the postmodernist critique of gender norms as being biological, as being destiny. So with that, thank you very much for attending this unregistered live show, the official live stream of Unregistered Academy. If you'd like to take this course and learn more about Michel Foucault, the postmodernist movement, the postmodern idea, postmodernist philosophy, go to unregisteredacademy.com, click the link in the description, and in a few weeks, I will see you in class for postmodernism and introduction. Thank you, and good night.